Renowned entertainer Skip Cunningham may be America's last great song and dance man. His talent became evident when he was a youth in Chicago, and today he's a veteran of stage and screen. He's been a featured artist and teacher at jazz and tap festivals, nightclubs, and TV shows worldwide. His career teaching and performing takes him around the world, and today he's landed in the KUOW studios. Skip, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'm guessing that Skip is a nickname. Does that have to do with dancing?
Well, it was a nickname from my father. But while in the Army in the Massachusetts area, I was trying to work while I was in the armed services, and I did find a way to do that. And in the process, I was able to secure an agent who would book me on the weekends or whenever I could get off from my Army duties. And my name at the time, and my given name is William Cunningham. So everybody knew me as Billy. So professionally, I would be Billy Cunningham. But at the time, in that particular area, there was a well-known comedian MC by the name of Billy Cunningham, and there was a well-known sports writer with one of the larger newspapers by the name of Billy Cunningham. So he asked me if I could maybe entertain the thought of changing it at least to something else while I was in the area. And I says, I really can't think of any other name I'd like to have. And then I uttered something like, well, my father has always called me Skip. And that's how I became Skip Cunningham. And with that, I joined my first show business union. And so it's been Skip Cunningham ever since.
You started your career as a child. Really, you started with the tap dancing, which has been central to what developed into being an all-around entertainer. What are your first recollections of tap dancing?
I had to be between the age of 4 or 5. And I remember vividly my mother taking me down to a dance class on the south side of Chicago. We lived in a community that was a suburb of Chicago. It was Chicago, actually, Cook County, but it was Morgan Park. That's where I was born and raised. And so we'd have to take a long streetcar ride down to her studio. And so I was introduced at that age, supposedly because I had this boundless energy and they were trying to channel it some kind of a way. And I understand I went a few weeks, well, maybe longer than that, not paying much attention at all except to the candy machine. And I think just when my mother was entertaining the thought of removing me from the class, something clicked. And I started to pay attention. And at that point, I started to pick up on what I was supposed to be doing very quickly. And so that's my first recollection of trying to tap dance. And it evolved very quickly from there.
Where did that lead?
Well, that led me to being one of the stars of the dance school per se. And Sadie Bruce, the famous Chicago Sadie Bruce, who was my teacher and first mentor in show business, kind of made me the little star of the dance school, and we would have recitals at the Civic Opera House in Chicago, and then in the springtime we would have recitals at the famous Regal Theater, where I saw many, many big bands coming through like Basie, Ellington, Cab Calloway, and they always had famous tap dancers and comedians and singers with the shows. So then I got a taste of performing at a very prestigious venue, and the more successful I was with it, needless to say, that was very encouraging. And yes, that is absolutely an exciting feeling. Within the dance school, my dance teacher teamed me with a young lady. Her name was, with a child like myself, her name was Sheila Johnson. I remember her. And we started to do a little act together. And we incorporated swing dance and tap within the performance, as well as singing. And we did these contests that were usually held in famous nightclubs. And of course, our parents had to escort us. But there we were, and because we were children, and doing what we did so well, we would always win the contest. So that was another way of being continually encouraged in this process of becoming what I've become now, a professional entertainer. I started to encounter big name band people. The first one, to my recollection, I had to have been about 10 years old, and I was working a famous Chicago theater called the Downtown Theater, and this was a contest. I was doing somewhat of an impersonation of Bill Bojangles Robinson in white tails and top silk hat, and I was also using a baton in this performance, like a majorette baton. Well, Noble Sissel, the famous Noble Sissel, was the band leader. And I won the contest, but in the process of my performance, I released the baton inadvertently, and it hit Noble Sissel on his shin. And it smarted enough for him to have to grab his leg and not conduct the band. And so I don't know if I'll go down into history. This is one of the most famous band leaders of the day. And so that was that particular incident.
You downed Noble Sissel, but the swingsters went on, I assume.
I won the contest, and the way it ran was it was supposed to run for 15 weeks. And interestingly enough, the contest that I won, Joe Louis's, the famous boxer's then wife, Marva Spalding, was singing on the show. So she lost to me, I guess if you want to look at it that way. And we were supposed to come back for a grand prize. I think it was $300, and those days, the $300 was a lot of money, But in the interim, Lionel Hampton came through with his band, and they had a famous number, Flying Home.
Yeah, his theme.
Really, really big. And the soloist was Illinois Jacquette. And they had this thing where the band would leave the stage, march down one side of the theater, out the back door, and come around through the other side of the theater, all the time playing Flying Home. And the audience just went absolutely bananas. Well, they wrecked the theater in the process. Seats were torn up. Glass was broken. That's how excited they were about this big hit song. So my father had to let me know that I was not going to be able to go back for the grand prize because the theater had been demolished and they boarded it up.
When you mentioned Flying Home, I recall that he was even asked not to play that at a certain club because they were afraid the audience would just be tearing up the balcony and that it would be dangerous.
Yeah, I experienced it.
Now, how did that music feed the dance, and how did the dance feed that music when you were performing live?
I remember seeing an interview that Count Basie had, and the interviewer asked him how would he describe his music. He simply said, "Pat your feet."
Pat your feet.
Pat your feet. And I guess if you really think about it, the way the Basie band played their music, you had to pat your feet.
The goal of bands at the time was to get the dancers out on the floor dancing. That was the number one objective of being a live performing dance band.
Yes.
And how did you craft your style of dance? Was that also around the music primarily?
The music was definitely the focus. The person performing it brings their personality to that. So there are tap dancers that I admire much more than myself. So I'm not in love with myself performing, but I'm in love with watching other tap dancers perform. and they thereby influence me in my performance. I even get influences from some of my students.
And it sounds like you're saying that a big part of the appeal of the dance is the opportunity for self-expression, and that's what you're seeing in a unique way in the students that and the other dancers that you're admiring.
No doubt.
Who are some of those great tap dancers of all time that you admire?
I was able to see great tap dancers come through with the big band shows. In other words, Count Basie would be the headliner at the theater. That's when they were doing 5 shows a day, and then the movies would alternate with the show. And there are famous theaters across the country like the Earl Theater. I forget whether it was in Baltimore or Philadelphia. Of course, the Apollo in New York. I would see them at the Regal Theater in Chicago. And when they would come through, they would always have what would be deemed a complete show. And there was always a great tap dance act on the show. And I would go and look at that and just be fascinated. They're doing something that I would like to do as well as they do it. And this is what I was watching as a child.
I'm Amanda Wilde in conversation with song and dance man Skip Cunningham on 94.9 KUOW. Skip, you had appeared on 3 episodes of Sanford & Son 3 years in a row. And I noticed you didn't play yourself, and in fact, you didn't even play the same character. You played a different character each time. That show is such a cult classic now.
Yeah. I'm still getting residuals from that. I think I got one last week, as a matter of fact. And those shows were done in the 70s. And Red Fox was a very dear friend of mine. And he had this proclivity towards trying to employ people he had interacted with as he came along. I mean, comedians that absolutely had no big name at all, and he always found a way to try to get them employment in the business. He was just sensational with that, and so yeah.
Was there a favorite character you played on the Sanford & Son series?
Well, the one that's seen a lot, where I had more lines, so to speak, than any of the others was, I think I was only on 3 times, 3 episodes in that period of time, was, I think they call the episode Fred Has a Baby.
Lamont, while you were away, your father rented your room to a young lady and she had a baby.
She had a baby in my room? No, son, she didn't have a baby in the room. She had a baby at the hospital and we brought her and the baby home.
Well, how long they gonna be here?
Not long.
How long?
Until the baby graduates from high school.
I'll get it.
Is this the Sanford residence?
Yeah?
I'm Don Evans, Lou Ella's husband.
Oh, it's the invisible man.
The hospital told me she was staying here. Where is she?
She's upstairs, first room to the left.
They have played that a lot over the years, because whenever the residual comes in, they show you what it came from,
Uh-huh.
They're not much, they may be $10, but I always say, God bless Red. He just helped to fill up my gas tank this week.
Exactly. And plus, it's just recognition of something that you did some time ago that people are still enjoying.
Right.
Looking back at the list of musicians you've played with, how about I throw out this name, Johnny Carson? Well, he's not a musician, but he's someone you worked with.
Well, that's real interesting. I'm going to try to capsule this. Skitch Henderson was the band leader at the time, and this was New York. This is before he moved to California. But I was so surprised. My manager was trying to get me a shot on the show, and when I got it, it shocked me and surprised me so much because that was just absolute gold, like it still is today, to try to get that shot on that show. They wanted to know if I could get to the studio by 5:30 that day. And I remember scrambling to pull together something to wear and to pull the kind of music together. But when I walked into the rehearsal, I'm looking at the band, and being such a jazz aficionado all my life, I just looked at the trumpet section. And that's that Clark Terry, formerly of the Basie Band and the Duke Ellington Band. And I'm looking at Doc Severinsen, who was not the band leader. He was just one of the members of the trumpet section. And I'm looking at Snooky Young, who was former member of the Basie band. And I'm saying, gosh, all these three guys are in the same trumpet section? And then I'm looking at the drummer, who was Ed Shaughnessy. And then I'm looking at the bass player, who's the great Milt Hinton. And they are about to play my music. Well, the guy who wrote the chart for me was just a super arranger. I realize that now. I'm still using this music 40 years later. And I remember them running it down the first time, and I stood there with my mouth hanging open because every dynamic was played with such a feeling that just blew me away. And then Skitch Henderson, he says, okay, guys, he says, go back to letter G. And I'm saying to myself, gosh, for what? Why? But whatever it was, he wanted it played more correct than it was, and they played it again.
What was the routine you did on The Tonight Show?
I did something that I did a lot because it was requested that I do it. I sang and danced to I Could Have Danced All Night, and it certainly wasn't the Julie Andrews version. It was, it has a decidedly jazz nuance to it. And I did something else. I did Cute. I started doing that as soon as I heard it with Sonny Payne of the Basie band doing the rhythmic fills, and so I tap danced those. And I did something else on the Merv Griffin show. By the way, it was the same circumstance with that band. I had moved to the West Coast, and I did the Merv Griffin show, although I had done it many times in New York. And when I get to the West Coast, there's a different group of studio musicians. There was both Condoli brothers in the same trumpet section, Pete and Conti. And there was Ray Brown on bass, the metronome himself. People like Richie Kamuka in the reed section. So once again, it happened again, And such a pleasure to hear your music played by people like that.
When you were working with these bands of superior musicians, did that change anything about your performance? Did that bring you to a different level?
Oh, listen. Like I said, now you're listening to the music the way the arranger intended for it to sound, because it's being played by the type of musicians that he might have had in mind in the first place. And, the only downside of it is you can't hear it often enough played by those guys. You'd like to do it 2 or 3 or 4 more times, So, of course, it changed the way you perform, no doubt.
You seem to have seen it all and done it all. What are your hopes for the future?
Every year something new seems to happen that should go into a book. So I think now is about the time to put it down in print. And as far as what's in the future, I would like to continue exactly what I'm doing here and perform at some semblance of a level that people will enjoy and walk away and say, wow, I just saw something that I liked.
Skip, thanks for coming in today and speaking with me and taking the time and doing a few steps as well.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Believe me.